wild assumptions about a huge enrollment increase or a huge enrollment decrease.
Right. You have to do a 5-year enrollment projection,
right,
with your Treasury materials. I think that's probably already in the works.
So I don't know if this is a outrageous question to ask, but it's your belief that Treasury would let us bond for 6 elementary schools?
If your enrollment projections support
rebuild
that.
6?
Mm-hmm.
Well, wait a minute. You just said if your enrollment projections support it.
What they typically would allow you to do is, yes, take that 5-year enrollment projection and split it among those schools that you intend to touch. And if Red Cedar is one of those schools, that would include Red Cedar. So you wouldn't be able to excessively overbuild at the other 5 schools to give you a plan. Now, what typically we do in a situation like this where a school district isn't sure how many, we would max out what the state would allow, and then as part of the design process, understand that there may be future additions to a building and plan for a potential future classroom wing extension.
But how do we know
Does
what
that make sense?
population we're building for if we're hoping for an enrollment increase of a certain cap?
Yeah, Rima, I'd have to get back with you on that. I think, but I want to be clear that this option would only exist if the board felt that going forward on improving all of the other elementary schools is a priority of this board. Because what I'm observing is you're trying to reach a consensus. You're attempting to improve your facilities. My job is not to tell you what I think is what option is best or what I personally like. I would never do that. That would be so inappropriate for me to do. My job is to just make sure you know what options exist for you within the context of the decisions that you're making. So if you decided that you're not, and I've been through this with school districts all over the state, when they're in the middle of school construction, their enrollment takes a nosedive, and they end up not doing a particular building.
Right.
Treasury's fine with that.
That's
what they're not happy with is if you go do something different than what you told your voters or what you told them. So if they are in a position to understand that the Department of Treasury is in a position to understand that you're not doing something different, it's just you're only going to do this within certain parameters, theirs and yours, that then it's a viable option.
So in terms of preparing motions, I mean,
well, and I wouldn't recommend a motion tonight on this. If it's intriguing to anyone on the board, you look at it. If it's not, and you're ready to move forward and just say either one, we're going to go with what we decided in 2 weeks ago, 4-3, or we're going to put this on hold and do a wait and see. I just move on to my next school district and my next bond issue. So it's not the point for me. The point is that you have a cafeteria.
I understand.
Options.
I had a procedural question. The question was, I don't know, would we need to incorporate this choice into the motion, a primary motion relative to the September 8 proposal, or could it be a separate subsequent motion at a subsequent meeting?
Oh, it would be a separate motion at a subsequent meeting.
Since it's a second series.
Bear with me, it's close to midnight. I'm just as tired as you guys are. No. I just have to say that school closure, for me in my world, and what I'm looking at, 2 weeks ago I was at a school board meeting and they had originally 9 elementary schools. They're down to 2. I was on the phone with another school district last week and they're moving their middle school kids into their high school. I mean, the reality is that this is what's happening statewide. You're in the enviable position that you're looking at potentially closing 1 4 years from now. Well, that's a dream come true for some of my other school clients. And that statement's not intended to sway you. That statement is intended to say this is the reality of this situation, is that when you're looking at school closure, you have much more options than many of my school clients have.
May I ask Jen a question? Again, I think Rima did pose a pertinent question. Then how do you know how what you're constructing your first 5 buildings for? The ones that are...
You would stay with what you're planning now. Excuse me, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Now you've confused me.
Babs, your question is, when we go to Treasury, what would we be
planning for?
Planning for the other elementary schools. You'd be planning most likely what you're planning now for those elementary schools.
But wouldn't we have excess space because we would be planning to incorporate
you're planning
Red Cedar?
to incorporate Red Cedar, so you could,
That's
that's
why
a
you
good point.
confused me, yes.
Yeah.
If your...
Better question for you
Yes,
to answer.
if your Treasury application is to touch those 6 buildings, then you can plan for buildings of slightly larger size than you have right now. They generally give you about 10% wiggle room for enrollment growth. Could you put together a Treasury app for 6 buildings and overbuild 5 to hold that extra additional 300 enrollment from a potential building closure?